The skies over Earth had been darkened for months, the shimmering outlines of the alien dreadnoughts casting long, ominous shadows over the cities below. The Zelthra had come without warning, their ships descending from the stars like gods of war, their technology so advanced that it made human defenses look like relics of a forgotten age. Weapons, systems, and tactics that had held dominion over the world for centuries were rendered useless in a matter of days. Within the first month, the major powers were brought to their knees. The United States, Russia, China, and Europe, nations that had long been at the top of the global hierarchy, had all mounted counterattacks, desperate to defend themselves. Nuclear strikes, energy weapons, and every military advancement known to humankind had been deployed. None had worked. The Zelthra's shields absorbed every assault like a sponge soaking up water. Their ground troops, bioengineered warriors with crystalline armor, marched through Earth's most fortified bases with terrifying ease. And yet, as the world's superpowers fell into disarray, something unexpected was happening. On the southernmost tip of the African continent, in a place overlooked by global intelligence agencies and presumed to be unimportant, a discovery was made. A discovery that could change the course of the war. In a secret underground facility near the slopes of Mount Kilimanjaro, Dr. Ayodele Mensah hunched over a console, his fingers moving swiftly across the holographic interface. The air around him hummed with energy as he and his small team monitored the results of their latest experiment. The facility, known only to a few select officials in the African coalition, was one of the few remaining safe zones, untouched by the invaders' wrath. They had developed something remarkable, an electromagnetic pulse that could, in theory, disable the Zelthra's shielding systems. The breakthrough hadn't come from vast military budgets or cutting-edge weapons programs. It had been the product of necessity, born in a place where innovation had always been driven by the need to do more with less. African nations, often dismissed on the world stage, had united under a shared vision when the invasion began. They pooled their resources and knowledge in secret, away from the eyes of the outside world. Dr. Mensah leaned back as the console pinged, signaling the end of the simulation. "Results?" he asked, though he already knew the answer. "Successful," said Amina, his lead engineer, her voice filled with quiet triumph. "The energy signature from the prototype matches the Zelthra's biocrystal structure. If we can scale it, their shields will fail." Mensah allowed himself a small smile, but his expression quickly hardened. "Good, but theory won't save us. We need to test it in the field." Amina's brow furrowed. "Testing means revealing it to the world, Doctor. The others won't be pleased." "Let them be displeased," Mensah snapped, though not unkindly. "We're running out of time. The Zelthra have already taken Lagos and Johannesburg. If we don't act soon, this entire continent will be enslaved. And the rest of the world?" Mensah sighed, running a hand over his graying hair. "The rest of the world is too busy bickering to see the truth. The European Federation is on the verge of collapse, and the North American coalition is still trying to fight with outdated tactics. They won't listen to us, not yet." Amina nodded grimly. "We need a demonstration, something that will make them pay attention." Mensah's eyes gleamed with determination. "Agreed. Prepare the test site. We're going to show the world what Africa is capable of." In Washington, D.C., President Elena Morales sat in the Situation Room, staring at the array of monitors that displayed the grim reality of the invasion. Her advisors were speaking, arguing, as they had been for days, but she wasn't listening. Instead, her attention was focused on the live feed from satellite reconnaissance. Another Zelthra ship was descending over the Midwest, its massive form blotting out the sun as it prepared to deploy its ground forces. "How long until the East Coast defenses are breached?" she asked quietly, cutting through the clamor. Her chief of defense, General Ford, looked up. 12 hours, maybe less. The Zelthra are focusing on key population centers. Their tactics are designed to break us, Morales finished, her voice tired. And they're succeeding. The room fell into a heavy silence. Morales turned to her intelligence officer, Jacobson. "What do we have from our allies? Any new developments?" Jacobson hesitated before speaking. "Russia and China are in talks for a joint strike, but their coordination is a mess. The European Federation is collapsing under internal strife. Africa, well, they've gone dark. No significant updates from the African Union. The president's gaze sharpened. Gone dark? Jacobson nodded. Last we heard, several African nations formed a coalition, but they've kept a low profile. They've refused our requests for aid or cooperation. Ford snorted. They're probably just trying to survive, same as the rest of us. Morales tapped her fingers on the table. Something didn't sit right. Africa's silence during this catastrophe felt deliberate. But before she could voice her suspicions, an urgent alert flashed on one of the monitors. A live feed from the outskirts of Cape Town. What the hell is that? Someone muttered. On the screen, a Zelthra ground cruiser, one of the invincible, city-destroying behemoths that had ravaged much of the northern hemisphere, was caught in a massive electrical surge. Sparks flew from its crystalline armor as its shield flickered, and then, impossibly, the ship began to disintegrate. Its once impenetrable hull crumbled like sand, collapsing in on itself as the ground forces scattered. Morales' eyes widened. Is that? Jacobson was already on it, fingers flying across his keyboard. Yes, ma'am. It's a Zelthra ship, destroyed by some kind of energy weapon. The feeds from Cape Town. The African coalition might have found a way to break their defenses. The room erupted into chaos as the implications set in. But Morales remained calm, her mind racing. Give me a line to Africa, she ordered. Now! Dr. Mensah stood on the observation deck, overlooking the testing site, his hands clasped behind his back. The demonstration had worked even better than they'd hoped. The Zelthra ship had been completely neutralized, its shield technology rendered useless by their electromagnetic pulse weapon. But victory fell hollow. He knew the global response would be swift, and not necessarily positive. As if on cue, his comms unit chirped. A secure line from President Morales herself. He gestured to Amina to patch it through. Dr. Mensah, this is President Elena Morales of the United States. We've just witnessed your success. I'm requesting an immediate conference call to discuss. I'm afraid it's not that simple, Madam President, Mensah interrupted. We've shared our technology with no one. Not because we wish to hoard it, but because of the disunity among nations. You would use this weapon as another tool in your arsenal, just as Russia, China, and Europe would. This weapon must be deployed globally and strategically if we are to win. Morales was silent for a moment before responding, her voice cold. Are you saying you won't share your findings? I'm saying we need unity, Mensah replied evenly. We need to work together, or the Zelthra will pick us off one by one. Africa has shown it can fight back, but we can't do it alone. A tense silence hung in the air. And if we refuse? Morales asked. Mensah's voice hardened. Then the Zelthra will win. Africa will survive longer than most, but eventually they'll come for us all. This is not a negotiation, President Morales. It's survival. In the days that followed, chaos erupted across the globe. The African coalition had issued a call for unity, offering their breakthrough technology to any nation willing to join in a global resistance. But distrust, ego, and centuries of geopolitical tension made cooperation nearly impossible. In Russia, President Orlov denounced Africa's demands as extortion, while China expressed deep reservations about allowing foreign interference in their sovereign military decisions. Europe, fractured by internal disputes, wavered between diplomacy and outright rejection. Back in the underground facility, Mensah watched the world's response with a heavy heart. They'll never unite in time, Amina whispered, her voice filled with dread. Mensah stood in silence for a long moment. Then we'll force their hand. The wind howled through the arid plains of Kenya, swirling dust around the entrance of the underground facility that housed the African coalition's secret weapon. Inside, a storm of a different kind brewed, with Dr. Mensah and Amina standing at the center of a tense command room, surrounded by holographic displays, communications consoles, and nervous engineers. The world had not responded as they had hoped. Russia had flat out refused to join, claiming the technology posed more of a threat to humanity than the Zelthra invasion. China had demanded to see proof of the technology's safety before agreeing to anything. while the fractured European Federation squabbled over the potential loss of sovereignty that might come with sharing control over the African invention. And the United States, while outwardly polite, had begun subtle movements of their own, deploying reconnaissance drones toward African airspace. It's like they'd rather tear each other apart than stop the damn aliens, Amina muttered, watching another refusal message come in from the United Nations. Mensa clenched his fists, his eyes fixed on the map showing the spread of the Zelthro invasion. The situation was deteriorating rapidly. Every day, new reports came in of cities falling, of millions being enslaved by the bioengineered Zelthro forces. No corner of the globe was safe. Yet in the face of this existential threat, the same old rivalries, distrust, and geopolitical games were playing out. They think they can survive on their own, Mensa said, his voice filled with bitterness. They think that because they've always had power, they'll always be able to fight back. We need to act, Amina said, her tone growing urgent. The Zelthra are adapting faster than even we expected. The electromagnetic pulse disrupts their shields now. But how long before they find a countermeasure? We might only have weeks, maybe days. Mensa turned to her, eyes blazing with determination. Then we'll make them listen. Amina frowned, confused. How? We'll show them the consequences of inaction, Mensa replied, his voice low. We'll hit a target so valuable that they'll have no choice but to fall in line. Amina's eyes widened. You mean an alien target? No, Mensa said, shaking his head. We'll take out a Zelthra shield on foreign soil. We'll make a statement. Amina blinked, stunned. You want to disable a Zelthra ship over Europe or America? They'll never agree to that. They'll see it as an attack. They can think what they want, Mensa said. We're going to show the world that unity isn't optional anymore. Far above Earth's surface, in the atmosphere, a fleet of Zelthra scout ships cruised across the stratosphere, their sleek, crystalline hulls catching the light from below. One of the ships, larger than the rest, hovered over Cape Town, where it had been stationed for weeks, studying the continent, preparing for the next wave of conquest. On board the massive vessel, the Zelthra leader, known only as the Arbiter, observed Earth with cold, dispassionate eyes. Its telepathic link to the other Zelthra ships pulsed with activity as it analyzed the global situation. Humanity's fragmentation was exactly as expected, petty and divided, easy to pick apart like a wounded prey animal surrounded by wolves. The Arbiter's attention shifted to Africa. Unlike the other regions, this continent had proved more difficult to subdue. Early skirmishes had yielded far fewer enslaved drones than anticipated. A sudden burst of unexpected electromagnetic activity had rendered several Zelthra drones incapacitated near key African strongholds. The Arbiter could sense a subtle resistance forming, but it dismissed the threat as trivial. As the alien leader prepared to dispatch more ground forces, the unthinkable happened. A sharp, electrical pulse rippled through the ship's hull. Lights dimmed, control panels flickered, and the Zelthra's telepathic link to the surrounding ships grew distorted and erratic. The Arbiter spun around, its crystalline limbs flashing with alarm. It had been hit. Its shield was down. For the first time in its long existence, the Arbiter felt a pang of something alien, fear. Miles below, on the outskirts of the Cape Town resistance camp, Dr. Mensa stood on a rocky outcropping, watching through binoculars as the massive Zelthra ship faltered in the sky. His pulse raced. The electromagnetic pulse had worked just as they had designed it. It's beautiful, Amina murmured beside him, her eyes wide with awe. We actually did it. The Zelthra ship, once thought indestructible, was now a sitting duck. As it hovered unsteadily, streaks of energy crackled across its crystalline hull, and small fires broke out along its surface. The ship's defenses had failed. The impossible was now reality. But they weren't done yet. Launch the next wave, Mensa ordered, turning to his communications officer. Seconds later, a barrage of missiles, rudimentary by Zelthra standards but deadly in the right hands, launched from hidden silos beneath the African plains. They soared through the sky, leaving trails of smoke as they zeroed in on the crippled alien vessel. The missile struck with pinpoint accuracy, tearing through the weakened hull. The ship erupted into flames, its once impenetrable structure collapsing in on itself as explosions rippled through its core. Debris rained down over the landscape as the once mighty Zelthra cruiser plummeted to the earth, crashing into the ocean with a thunderous roar. Mensa and his team watched in stunned silence as the dust settled. Amina turned to him, her face flushed with victory. "We did it, Mensa. We destroyed one of their ships." Mensa nodded slowly, but his mind was already racing ahead. "This is only the beginning. The world will see this, and they'll know Africa has the key to defeating them." It didn't take long for the news to spread. By the time Mensa returned to the underground facility, messages were pouring in from governments around the globe. The footage of the Cape Town Zelthra ship collapsing into the ocean had gone viral within hours, broadcast on every major news network, discussed in every political chamber. The United States demanded an explanation. Russia condemned the African coalition for reckless endangerment of global security. The European Federation expressed concern over the unilateral use of a new and untested weapon. But among the chaos, there were also calls for cooperation. Several smaller nations, desperate for hope, had already reached out, asking to join the African coalition's defense efforts. Their leaders recognized what the superpowers refused to see, that Africa held the only viable solution to the Zelthra's superior technology. Mensa stood in the war room, surrounded by monitors displaying messages, videos, and incoming communication requests. He knew the tide was turning, but they were far from unified. "They're still not ready," Amina muttered, scanning the latest batch of reports. "The United States wants us to hand over the technology. Russia's accusing us of escalating the war. Europe can't make up its mind." Mensa stared at the map of the world, where Zelthra-controlled territories continued to expand. "They'll come around," he said, though the words felt hollow. "They have no choice." Amina shook her head. "No, Mensa. They'll never come around willingly. They're too proud, too fearful of losing control. They'd rather gamble on their own defenses than join us." Mensa frowned. "What are you suggesting?" "We need to force their hand," Amina said, her voice hardening. "We need to show them what's at stake if they don't join us. We need to disable more Zelthra ships in their territories. Make them see." Mensa remained silent, staring at the map. His instinct was to agree, but he also knew the cost. They were on the edge of global conflict, not just with the Zelthra but with their own kind. One wrong move, and humanity could fracture even further. "I'll think about it," he said finally, though Amina's words echoed in his mind. Force their hand. Days passed. The Zelthra continued their advance, with more cities falling under their control. The superpowers were scrambling, deploying every remaining asset they had, but none of their weapons could break the Zelthra shields. And then the unthinkable happened. During a meeting of the United Nations Security Council, the Zelthra attacked New York City. The alien ships descended without warning, their crystalline hulls gleaming in the midday sun. They swarmed the skyline, firing energy beams into the streets below, leveling entire city blocks within minutes. Millions of people were killed in the first hour of the attack. The world watched in horror as the invincible invaders brought one of humanity's greatest cities to its knees. President Morales, in a desperate bid to save her people, ordered the launch of the United States' most advanced weapons. Tactical nuclear strikes were deployed against the Zelthra fleet. It was a catastrophic mistake. The Zelthra shields absorbed the nuke's energy, amplifying their power and redirecting it back toward the ground. The explosions that followed were unlike anything humanity had ever seen. The devastation stretched across the East Coast, leaving behind a wasteland where New York City once stood. The message was clear. The Zelthra could not be fought with conventional means. In the aftermath of the attack, panic swept across the globe. The European Federation declared a state of emergency. China and Russia scrambled to fortify their borders, while smaller nations begged the African coalition for help. But Africa could only do so much alone. "We can't wait any longer," Amina said one evening, her voice tense. "We have the power to disable their ships. We need to start taking them down, everywhere." Mensa stood at the edge of the command center, staring at the screens displaying the aftermath of the New York attack. He knew Amina was right. The world would never unite willingly. They had to show them the cost of disunity. He turned to her, eyes filled with resolve. We'll strike the Zelthra wherever they appear next. And this time, we won't ask for permission. The wind howled through the arid plains of Kenya, swirling dust around the entrance of the underground facility that housed the African Coalition's secret weapon. Inside, the command room was tense with anticipation. The air hummed with energy as Dr. Mensa, Amina, and the rest of the team stood before the central holographic display, which showed the global map dotted with Zelthra-controlled territories. The world was still reeling from the devastation of New York, but there was no time to mourn, only time to act. Amina's voice broke the silence. The Zelthra fleet is repositioning. Their movements are erratic, but it looks like they're concentrating their forces in Europe. Mensa's gaze sharpened on the map. They're reacting to our last strike. They know we're a threat now, but they don't know where we'll strike next, Amina replied, her eyes gleaming with determination. We have the element of surprise. Mensa nodded, though his mind was already racing ahead. They needed to hit the Zelthra hard, and they needed to do it fast before the alien invaders could adapt to their technology. But more than that, they needed to force the world's superpowers to recognize that Africa held the key to humanity's survival. We'll target the Zelthra ship over Berlin, Mensa said, his voice steady. It's a major stronghold, and its destruction will send a clear message. Amina hesitated. Berlin? But the European Federation is already on the brink of collapse. If we hit there, they'll have no choice but to join us, Mensa finished, his tone leaving no room for argument. We've given them enough warnings. Now, we show them what's at stake. Amina nodded, though a flicker of doubt crossed her face. Mensa didn't miss it. He placed a hand on her shoulder, his expression softening. I know it's risky, Amina, but we're out of time. Every day we delay, more people die. We have to make them see reason. She looked up at him, her resolve hardening. You're right. Let's do this. Hours later, the African Coalition's base buzzed with activity as preparations for the strike on Berlin were finalized. Mensa and Amina stood side by side in the command center, watching as their team coordinated the launch. The electromagnetic pulse generator, the heart of their weapon, hummed ominously in the background. Target locked, the communications officer reported. All systems are green. Proceed with the countdown, Mensa ordered, his eyes fixed on the display showing the Zelthra ship hovering ominously over Berlin. It was a behemoth of a craft, its crystalline structure glinting menacingly under the cold European sky. As the countdown began, Amina turned to Mensa. We're going to draw a lot of fire for this. Mensa didn't look away from the display. Let them come. We're ready. The final seconds ticked away, and then, with a blinding flash, the electromagnetic pulse was unleashed. The energy surged through the atmosphere, an invisible wave of destruction that raced toward the Zelthra ship. For a moment, nothing happened. The ship continued to hover, its shields shimmering in the sunlight. Then, the shields flickered, and in a heartbeat, they collapsed. The Zelthra ship shuddered as its defenses failed, and cracks began to appear in its crystalline hull. The command room erupted in cheers, but Mensa and Amina remained silent, their eyes locked on the display. Fire the missiles, Mensa ordered. The missiles launched from hidden silos across Africa, streaking across the sky toward their target. They struck with deadly precision, tearing through the weakened hull of the Zelthra ship. Explosions rippled across its surface, and within moments, the ship began to disintegrate. The once invincible alien craft crumbled, its wreckage raining down over Berlin. Amina exhaled slowly. It's done. Mensa nodded, but his expression was grim. This is only the beginning. The world will see this as a challenge, not a call for unity. They'll see reason, Amina insisted, though there was a hint of doubt in her voice. They have to, but Mensa wasn't so sure. As the command center erupted in a flurry of activity, he felt a cold knot of dread settle in his stomach. They had won a battle, but the war was far from over. The news of the Berlin strike spread like wildfire. Across the globe, governments scrambled to respond. In Washington, Moscow, Beijing, and Brussels, emergency meetings were held behind closed doors. The destruction of the Zelfra ship over Berlin had shattered the fragile balance of power, and now the world's superpowers were faced with a choice: unite under Africa's leadership or risk annihilation. In the African coalition's base, Mensa watched the unfolding chaos with a heavy heart. The messages pouring in from around the world were a mix of praise, condemnation, and desperate pleas for assistance. But one message stood out among the rest: a transmission from President Morales. "Dr. Mensa," her voice crackled over the comms, "we need to talk." Mensa motioned for Amina to patch the call through. "Madam President," he greeted her, his tone formal. "I assume you've seen the results of our latest operation." "I have," Morales replied, her voice tight with controlled anger. "You've made your point, Dr. Mensa, but you've also made enemies. Russia is accusing you of escalating the conflict. China is preparing to deploy countermeasures. Europe is in chaos. You've pushed us to the brink of global war." Mensa's jaw tightened. "We're already at war, Madam President. The Zelfra are destroying our world, and the only way to stop them is through unity. Africa has the technology to win this war, but we can't do it alone. The world needs to come together." Morales was silent for a moment. "And if we don't?" Mensa's voice was cold. "Then humanity will fall, one city at a time." Another silence. Then Morales spoke, her tone softer. "What do you want, Dr. Mensa? What will it take for Africa to share its technology?" "Unity," Mensa replied without hesitation. "A global alliance with shared resources and command. We cannot afford to fight each other any longer." "And who leads this alliance?" Morales asked, her voice laced with suspicion. "Not Africa," Mensa said firmly. "Not any one nation. We must lead together, or not at all." Morales sighed, the weight of the decision evident in her voice. "I'll see what I can do. But you need to understand, Dr. Mensa, this won't be easy. The world isn't ready to be led by Africa." Mensa's eyes hardened. "Then we'll make them ready." Days passed, and the world teetered on the edge of disaster. The Zelfra continued their relentless advance, their ships descending on city after city. Humanity was running out of time. In the African coalition's base, tensions were high. Mensa and Amina worked tirelessly, coordinating with their allies, deploying their technology wherever they could. But it wasn't enough. The world's superpowers were still divided, still unwilling to fully commit to a united front. Then the unthinkable happened. A Zelfra fleet, larger than any seen before, descended on London. The city's defenses crumbled under the alien onslaught, and within hours, London was in ruins. The attack sent shockwaves across the globe. For the first time, even the most powerful nations realized the true extent of the Zelfra threat. In the aftermath of the London attack, President Morales called for an emergency summit of world leaders. The summit, held in a secure location in Geneva, brought together the leaders of every major nation on Earth. Dr. Mensa and Amina were invited as representatives of the African coalition. The summit was tense, with leaders exchanging accusations and demands. But as the hours wore on, it became clear that there was no other option. The Zelfra were too powerful, too relentless. Humanity had no choice but to unite. In the final hours of the summit, an agreement was reached. A global alliance would be formed with shared command and resources. The African coalition's technology would be deployed worldwide, under the control of the newly formed Global Defense Command. Dr. Mensa stood at the center of the room as the agreement was signed, his expression unreadable. Amina stood beside him, her face a mask of resolve. They had done it. The world was finally united. But as they left the summit, Amina turned to Mensa, her voice low. "We've won, haven't we?" Mensa glanced at her, his eyes weary. "We've won a battle, Amina, but the war is far from over." The days that followed were a blur of activity. The newly formed Global Defense Command moved quickly to deploy the African coalition's technology across the globe. Zelfra's ships were targeted and destroyed in rapid succession, their once impenetrable shields crumbling under the electromagnetic pulses. But the Zelfra were adapting. Each battle grew harder, each victory more costly. The alien invaders were relentless, their biocrystalline armor evolving to counter the humans' new weapons. In the African Coalition's base, Mensa and Amina worked around the clock, searching for a way to exploit the Zelthra's evolving weaknesses. And then, in the early hours of a cold, clear morning, they found it. "It's their biocrystals," Amina said, her voice filled with excitement. "We've been focusing on their shields, but the crystals themselves have a resonance frequency. If we can target that frequency, we can destroy them from within." Mensa studied the data, his mind racing. "But to do that, we need to get inside one of their ships. We need to deploy the pulse directly at the source." "It's risky," Amina admitted, "but it's our best shot. If we can pull this off, we could end the war." Mensa nodded slowly. "Then we'll do it. We'll take the fight to them." The mission was planned with meticulous precision. Amina and a small team of elite soldiers would infiltrate a Zelthra ship, deploy the pulse at the heart of the biocrystal network, and escape before the ship was destroyed. It was a dangerous, near-suicidal mission, but Amina volunteered without hesitation. As the day of the mission arrived, Mensa stood with Amina in the launch bay, his expression grim. "Are you sure about this?" Amina smiled, though there was a sadness in her eyes. "It's what needs to be done, Mensa. We've come this far. We can't stop now." He nodded, though his heart was heavy. "Just be careful, Amina. We can't afford to lose you." She squeezed his hand, her smile fading. "You've taught me everything I know, Mensa. I'll be back. I promise." But as she boarded the transport, Mensa couldn't shake the feeling that he was saying goodbye for the last time. The mission was a success, but at a terrible cost. Amina and her team managed to infiltrate the Zelthra ship, deploying the pulse at the heart of the biocrystal network. The ship disintegrated in a massive explosion, its destruction rippling through the Zelthra fleet. But Amina's team never made it out. They gave their lives to ensure humanity's survival. Back in the African Coalition's base, Mensa received the news with a heavy heart. He stood in silence, staring at the empty spot where Amina had once stood, her laughter still echoing in his mind. But there was no time to grieve. The war was still raging, and there was still work to be done. The destruction of the Zelthra fleet marked a turning point in the war. With their forces decimated and their technology compromised, the Zelthra began to retreat. Humanity, united under the Global Defense Command, pressed the advantage, driving the invaders back. But the cost was high. Cities lay in ruins, millions were dead, and the world's political landscape was forever altered. The African Coalition emerged as a new superpower, respected and feared for their role in saving humanity. In the aftermath of the war, Dr. Mensa became a reluctant leader, his name known across the globe. But despite his newfound power, he remained focused on one goal, ensuring that the world's hard-won unity was not lost. The Global Defense Command evolved into a permanent alliance, dedicated to protecting Earth from any future threats. Nations that had once been rivals now worked together, sharing resources and knowledge in a way that had seemed impossible just months before. But the scars of the war ran deep. The world was a different place now, shaped by the horrors it had endured. As Mensa stood on the steps of the new Global Defense Command headquarters, he looked out at the city below, a city rebuilding itself from the ashes of destruction. Amina's sacrifice had not been in vain. The world was united, but it was also fragile. The threat of the Zelthra might have passed, but Mensa knew that humanity's greatest challenge still lay ahead, learning to live in peace. As the sun set on the horizon, casting a warm glow over the city, Mensa turned and walked back inside. The work was far from over, but for the first time in a long while there was hope, and that he thought was a start.